My name is Henry Wallace. I am 65 years old, a retired long-haul trucker, and I live here in Dallas, Texas. What I am about to tell you is the most horrifying story a man can live through. It is about the day I returned from a trip earlier than expected and discovered that my wife, the woman I had been married to for 35 years, was hiding a secret that still makes me tremble just remembering it. If you have ever felt like you didn't truly know someone you loved, please hit the like button to bring some comfort to this suffering heart. Subscribe to the Grandpa's Diaries channel right now so you don't miss the next true stories I will tell you. And let me know in the comments where you are watching this video from and what time it is over there. Have you ever discovered something terrible about someone close to you? I love knowing which corner of America is listening and at what moment of the day you took a break for this old man. I was born and raised right here in Dallas, in a simple neighborhood where everyone knew each other. My father was a mechanic and always said that a real man had to work with his hands and bring home the breadwinner. I learned early on that work was sacred, that a man did not complain about being tired. When I finished high school, around 15, I started working as a helper at a trucking company. The smell of diesel and the low rumble of the engines fascinated me. It was a world of men, of highways, of freedom. It was there, at that transport company, that I learned to drive the big rigs. Mr. Jenkins, an old veteran driver, taught me everything. He used to say that the road was a hard but fair teacher, and that those who respected it returned home safe and sound. I spent years as a helper, loading and unloading merchandise, until I managed to get my special license and became a driver. That was the realization of a dream. I was still young, full of energy, and I loved hitting the highway. The long trips didn't scare me, quite the opposite. I liked the solitude of the asphalt, the radio playing country music, the stops at roadside diners. I met Eleanor on a sunny Sunday after service at the neighborhood church. She was a friend of a cousin of mine and had that quiet, modest air that my mother always said was the sign of a family woman. She wore a floral dress, her hair pulled back, and had a shy smile that won me over instantly. We started talking after the service, always with my cousin nearby. Everything very proper, as was done back then. She lived with her parents, was the youngest of 4 siblings, and worked helping her mother with sewing at home. Eleanor was very devout, went to church every week, and prayed the rosary every day. That pleased me because I had also been raised in a religious family, though I wasn't as devout as she was. But I saw in that faith a sure sign that she was a serious woman of principles. My mother approved of her immediately, saying that a church girl would not cause trouble, that she was a guarantee of a happy marriage. We started dating with the blessings of both families, everything very traditional. I worked more and more, making trips that lasted for days, saving money for our future. After 3 years of dating, we had a simple wedding in the same church where we met. Eleanor was beautiful in white, with that same shy smile. We rented a small house right here in Dallas, in a quiet neighborhood. She quit her sewing work and dedicated herself to taking care of the house. She said she wanted to be a dedicated wife, that her role was to make our home a peaceful place for when I returned from my trips. And it was. When I arrived after days on the road, the house was always immaculate, smelling of home-cooked meals. She welcomed me with affection, asked about the trip, and prepared that hot tea I loved. The first few years were good and peaceful. We had one son, Ethan, who filled our lives with joy. Eleanor was a dedicated mother. She took care of everything while I was away. And I was away a lot, it is true. The trips were long. Sometimes I was on the road for a whole week. But it was the job that paid the bills. That gave us the means to buy our own house after a few years. A good house with a backyard and a spacious laundry room in the back, which was Eleanor's pride and joy. She loved that space. She said it was perfect for taking care of the family's clothes. Over time, I started to notice that Eleanor was becoming increasingly involved with the church. It wasn't just the Sunday service. She participated in prayer groups, went on spiritual retreats, and spent hours reading the Bible. Sometimes, when I got back from a trip, I would find her kneeling in a room, praying out loud with an intensity that made me feel uncomfortable. But I thought it was just a phase, that everyone has their own way of seeking spiritual comfort. I was too busy with work to pay much attention. Eleanor also started making more friends at church and in the neighborhood. She knew all the neighbors. She knew everyone's business. Occasionally, when I was home, she would comment about so-and-so being a gossip, or this one being ill-mannered, or that one being loose. She always had a criticism, always found fault with people. I stayed out of it. I thought it was just women's talk, those neighborhood trivialities that meant nothing. How wrong I was, how blind I was. Our marriage settled into that routine. Me on the road, her at home, me bringing in the money, her taking care of everything. Everything seemed fine, everything in its place. Ethan grew up, went to college, and left home. We were left alone, older now, each doing our own thing, her with her church activities, me with my jobs. We talked little, but I thought that was normal after so many years together. I thought intimacy was just that, a quiet companionship, a predictable routine. I never imagined what was happening right under my nose. I never imagined the hell that existed inside my own home, in the laundry room she loved so much. It was a Friday afternoon, a few years ago, when everything changed. I had left for a trip that was supposed to last the entire weekend. It was a delivery to Chicago, a route I took often. But when I hit the highway, a heavy rain started. The kind that only falls here in the Midwest. The rain made visibility impossible, and parts of the interstate started flooding. The radio warned of jackknifed tractor trailers and highway closures. I decided to turn back. It wasn't worth the risk. I called the company, informed them I would reschedule the delivery, but I did not call home. I thought I would surprise Eleanor, get back early, maybe even prepare dinner together, something we hadn't done in a long time. When I parked the truck in front of the house, it was around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I quietly opened the back door, wanting to sneak up and surprise her. But as I walked through the kitchen, I heard strange sounds coming from the laundry room. A low whimpering, muffled shouts. My heart started pounding in my chest, a terrible premonition washing over me. I slowly approached the laundry room door, which was slightly ajar, and peered inside. What I saw instantly paralyzed me, freezing the blood in my veins. 5 women were tied to old chairs, gagged with rags, and blindfolded with bandanas like the one I used in the truck. They had rags covering their faces, but you could tell they were terrified by the choked cries and their trembling bodies. The floor was wet, covered in puddles of water mixed with something that looked like blood. And in the midst of that horror was Eleanor, my wife of 35 years, holding an iron that was still steaming, her face completely calm, almost smiling. When she saw me standing there in the doorway, paralyzed with shock, she didn't show the slightest hint of surprise or fear. On the contrary, she lowered the iron slowly, very carefully, as if I were only interrupting a routine domestic chore, and looked at me with that serene expression I knew so well. It was that calm look, that absurd abnormality in the face of that hellish scene, that made me realize something was deeply wrong with the woman I thought I knew. My whole body trembled, my legs nearly gave way, but I managed to speak. though my voice came out weak and choked. Eleanor. My God, Eleanor. What are you doing? I could barely believe what I was seeing. The bound women struggled desperately, trying to scream through the rags covering their faces. One of them had red marks on her arms, fresh burns that were still smoking. The smell I had noticed outside was of burnt flesh mixed with cleaning products. My stomach churned, but I couldn't take my eyes off Eleanor, hoping she would give me some explanation that made sense, that would turn this nightmare into something comprehensible. She sighed, as if annoyed by the interruption, and spoke with that sweet voice she always used with me. You're home early, Henry. I was going to make a surprise for you. I was almost done with my work for the day. Work for the day? She said that as if she were normally ironing clothes, as if those tied-up, burned women were just wrinkled garments that needed to be straightened out. My mind couldn't process it. I opened and closed my mouth several times, trying to form words, but nothing made sense. Was I having a nightmare? Had I crashed the truck on the highway, and was I in a coma dreaming this madness? Surprise, Eleanor? What surprise? Who are these women? Why are they tied up? What did you do to them? My voice was louder now, the shock giving way to rising panic. I took a step into the laundry room, and that's when I saw the details better. There was a table in the corner with instruments arranged in a row. An open notebook with names written in it, a large, worn Bible beside it. The walls had dark stains that looked old, as if this were not the first time this had happened here. How had I never seen this before? How had she hidden all this from me? Eleanor placed the iron on the ironing board, tucked her hair behind her ear with a delicate gesture, and began to speak with terrifying calmness. These are the purifications, Henry. God chose me to do his cleansing work in this dirty world. Each one of these women here committed terrible sins, and I was called to purify them with fire, just as the Lord purifies silver in a furnace. She pointed to each of the women as she spoke, as if introducing guests at a party. That one there is Laura, the neighbor on the corner who spreads lies about the families in the neighborhood. Her tongue is dirty. It needs to be burned to learn not to sin anymore. This one here is Denise from the Kroger, who was always rude and disrespectful, who humiliated poor customers. Her pride needs to be destroyed by the sacred fire. The one in the middle is the teacher Brenda, the one who humiliated our Ethan in front of the whole class, remember? She caused so much suffering to our son. She deserves to feel suffering firsthand. That one is Michelle, the secretary from that company where you worked, the one who was shamelessly flirting with you. No respect for our marriage. And this last one is Carol from the church who pretends to be a saint but judges everyone. I couldn't breathe properly. My head was spinning, trying to understand what I was hearing. Eleanor knew these women. She had socialized with them, planned all this, and brought them inside our home. Eleanor, you've gone mad. This is insanity. You are torturing people. These women have families. They have lives. You can't do this. I was yelling now, moving closer to her. But she raised her hand for calm, like a patient teacher with an agitated student. It's not madness, my love. It's divine justice. God spoke to me in dreams. He showed me who the sinners were that needed to be purified. Each of these women was marked by the Lord, and I am merely his instrument. I use the iron because it is a humble, domestic object, something every homemaker uses to make things clean and tidy. It is perfect for the work of purification. The heat burns away the sin. It marks the flesh so the soul can be saved. I am doing them a service, Henry. I am saving them from eternal damnation. My God, Eleanor had completely lost her mind. The woman standing in front of me was not the person I had married. I looked at the open notebook on the table and felt my blood run even colder. There was a huge list of female names. There must have been around 32 names on it. 5 of them were crossed out with a red line. Next to each name were annotations. Gossip, punished with the iron on the tongue. Proud, punished with the iron on the face. Adulterer, punished with the iron on the chest. There were also dates ranging from 3 years ago until today. 3 years. She had been doing this for 3 years, every time I left on a trip. How long have you been doing this, Eleanor? How many women have you hurt already? My voice came out hoarse, full of horror. She smiled again, an almost proud smile. 3 years that God gave me this mission. At first I was afraid. I doubted if it really was Him speaking to me. But after the first purification, everything became clear. I felt such great peace, Henry, a certainty that I was fulfilling my purpose on earth. I have already purified 12 women before these 5 here. Some received the marking and were released to tell others about divine justice. Others could not withstand the purification process and went directly to the Lord's judgment. She couldn't withstand the process. She was saying she had killed people. My wife was a murderer, a serial killer, who used our laundry room as a torture chamber. How many times had I come back from a trip and found the house smelling of heavy cleaning products? How many times had she said she was doing a deep clean? Was she cleaning blood, hiding evidence? How had I never suspected anything? How could I have been so blind, so absent? The bound women started struggling harder, their muffled cries becoming more desperate. They had heard everything. They knew they were at risk of death. I had to do something. I had to get them out of there and call the police for help. But my body was paralyzed by the shock, by the discovery that I had lived next to a monster for decades without realizing anything. Eleanor, who prayed the rosary every day, who went to church religiously, who took care of the house so meticulously, was actually a cruel psychopath who tortured and killed women in the name of a distorted faith. Henry, you need to understand that this is bigger than us. It is a sacred calling. I didn't choose this. I was chosen. These women who are here are not victims. They are sinners who need to pay for the wrongs they caused. The neighbor Laura destroyed marriages with her gossip, causing suicides with her lies. Denise humiliated poor people, humble folk who already suffered so much. The teacher traumatized children, including our son. Michelle tried to destroy our marriage. Carol is a hypocrite who uses faith to judge and condemn others. They all deserve the purification I am performing. And you know what? When I put the hot iron on their skin and they scream, I feel that God is smiling, giving me strength to continue. The coldness with which she spoke, the absolute conviction in her voice, was more terrifying than the screams or the smell of burnt flesh. She truly believed she was doing the right thing. She had no remorse, no doubt, no awareness that this was monstrous. I looked at the woman who had slept beside me for 35 years and recognized nothing in her. It was as if a stranger had stolen Eleanor's body and was using it to commit these atrocities. Eleanor, I am going to release these women now, and I am going to call the police. You are sick, you need help, you need treatment. What you are doing is murder. It is torture. There is nothing divine about it. It is pure horror. I took a step towards the tied-up women, but Eleanor moved quickly, grabbed the hot iron again, and held it up to me like a weapon. Don't you dare, Henry. Don't you dare interfere with God's work. These women are going to complete the purification process, and then you will understand. You will see how they leave here transformed, clean of sins. And if you try to stop me, you will be setting yourself against the divine plan. Her eyes shone with a fanaticism that chilled me to the bone. Would she be capable of attacking me too? Was I also in danger? But looking at those 5 terrified women, hearing their choked cries, knowing Eleanor had already killed others before, I knew I had to act, even if it meant putting myself at risk. In that moment, looking at the hot iron in Eleanor's hand and those 5 women who depended on me to survive, something woke up inside me. It was a mix of rage, fear, and a courage I didn't know I had. I had spent my whole life being a quiet man who avoided trouble, who just wanted to work and live in peace. But there, in that laundry room of hell, I needed to be someone else. I needed to be strong enough to face the monster my wife had become. Eleanor, put that iron down now. Don't force me to use force against you. My voice came out firm, firmer than I expected. I took another step toward her and saw her face change. The serenity gave way to an expression of rage I had never seen on her before. Her eyes narrowed. Her mouth became a thin line, and she gripped the iron's handle so hard her knuckles turned white. You don't understand, Henry. You never understood anything. You spent your whole life on the road, leaving me alone, abandoning me to take care of everything. And when I finally found my purpose, when God finally gave me an important mission, you want to stop me? She screamed now, her voice full of a bitterness that seemed to have been stored up for years. Do you think it was easy raising our son alone while you drove all over America? Do you think it was easy putting up with the neighbors' gossip, the humiliations at the Kroger, the teacher's rudeness toward our Ethan? I suffered all that in silence, holding on to the pain, until God showed me that I no longer had to be the submissive, suffering wife. He gave me power. He gave me purpose. Her words hit me like punches. Had I been an absent husband? Had my dedication to work pushed her to this madness? But no, I couldn't think that way. Many men worked away, traveled, and their wives didn't become serial murderers. What Eleanor had become was not my fault. It was a sickness, a terrible deviation that had grown inside her, fed by a distorted religious fanaticism. Eleanor, if you felt alone, if you were suffering, you should have talked to me. We could have worked it out together. But what you did, what you are doing, doesn't solve anything. It only creates more suffering, more pain. These women have families, Eleanor. There are people who love them, who are looking for them. You cannot play God. I tried to use a softer tone, appealing to some remnant of humanity that might still exist in her. But she violently shook her head, her loose hair lashing her sweaty face. They don't have anyone worthwhile. Laura is a widow, and her children barely talk to her because they know she's a snake. Denise is a bitter spinster everyone avoids. The teacher is divorced, and no one tolerates her presence. Michelle is a lost woman who only tries to steal other people's husbands. And Carol, that hypocrite, has a sham marriage where everyone knows her husband has a mistress. I investigated every one of them, Henry. I studied their lives for months before performing the purification. I don't choose my missions randomly. God shows me exactly who needs to be punished. As she spoke, I slowly moved to the side, trying to get closer to the tied-up women without her noticing. But Eleanor was smart, smarter than I had imagined. She took a step to block my path, keeping the iron between us like a deadly barrier. The steam coming off it made a low, threatening sound, and I could feel the heat from a distance. Don't try anything, Henry. I don't want to hurt you. You are my husband. You are the father of my son. But if you insist on putting yourself between my divine mission and me, I will have to consider that you too have been corrupted by evil. And then there will be no choice. I will have to purify you too. The coldness with which she said that made me realize she was serious. My own wife was threatening me with torture. How had life reached this point? The tied-up women were struggling more and more, trying to loosen their restraints. One of them, the one Eleanor had called Laura, had managed to loosen the rag covering her face a little, and I could see her terrified eyes pleading for help. Blood was dripping from her arm, where the burns were deepest. Another, Denise apparently, had fainted in the chair, her head slumped forward. How long had they been there? How much suffering had they already gone through before I arrived? Eleanor, listen. We can talk about this. We can turn off that iron, untie these women, and we will sort this out as a family. No one has to know what happened here. We'll find a doctor for you, a therapist, someone who can help you. You are not well, my love. This is not normal. It is not right. Let me help you. I tried one last time to appeal to the woman I had loved, the mother of my son, the person who had shared life with me for so many years. For a second, just a second, I saw something different in her eyes. Maybe a doubt, a spark of the old Eleanor. But then she blinked, and that fanatic expression returned with full force. You don't understand because your faith is weak, Henry. You were always lukewarm in religion. You only went to church to please me. But I have a direct connection with the divine. I hear the voice of God guiding me. And he is telling me now that you are a test, a temptation that Satan put in my path to make me give up the mission. But I will not give up. I will complete the purification of these 5, and then I will continue with the rest of the list. I still have 25 names to work on. 25. She was planning to torture and possibly kill 25 more women. I couldn't let that continue for another second. I looked around, searching for something I could use as a weapon or a distraction. I saw a bucket of water in the corner near the washing machine. If I could throw water on her, maybe the shock would make her drop the iron. Or maybe I could just rush her and wrench the iron from her hand. I was stronger, bigger. I had the physical advantage. But would I be able to use force against the woman I had loved for so long? Eleanor noticed my gaze towards the bucket and smiled cruelly. Are you thinking of attacking me, Henry? Of using your brute strength against me? Go ahead, try it. But think carefully about what will happen next. If you hurt me, who will take care of you? Who will cook your meals, wash your clothes, take care of the house? You need me. You always needed me. I am the one who keeps your life organized while you drive around. And think about Ethan, too. What are you going to tell our son? That his father assaulted his mother? That he destroyed the family? She was trying to manipulate me, using our shared life as a weapon against me. But I couldn't fall for that anymore. Our marriage had ended the moment I opened that door and saw the horror she was capable of. There was no turning back. There was no way to pretend we were a normal family, a regular older couple who were going to age together peacefully. Ethan needs to know the truth about you, Eleanor. He needs to know what kind of mother he has, and I need to live with a clear conscience, knowing I did the right thing when I discovered what you were. I took a deep breath, gathering the courage for what I had to do. Now put that iron down and step away from those women. I won't ask you again. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Or what, Henry? What are you going to do? Hit me? Kill me? You don't have the guts. You never had the guts for anything in life besides driving a truck in a straight line. You were always a weak, cowardly man, running away to the highway whenever there was any trouble at home. Do you think I didn't know you stayed out longer than you needed to, just so you wouldn't have to deal with me? Do you think I didn't notice how you avoided deep conversations? How you pretended to be too tired to pay attention to me? You pushed me into God's arms, Henry. You left me so alone that I had no choice but to seek comfort in faith. And it was in faith that I found my true reason for being. Her words hurt because they had a kernel of truth. I had been absent. I had used work as an excuse not to face the problems in our marriage. How many times had Eleanor tried to talk to me about important things? And I had used the excuse that I was tired from the trip. How many times had I seen signs that something wasn't right with her and simply ignored them because it was easier to pretend everything was fine? But now was not the time for self-pity. Now was the time to act. I feigned a movement to the left, and when Eleanor followed my movement with the iron, I quickly lunged to the right toward the bucket of water. I managed to grab it and threw the contents in her direction. The water hit her arm and part of her body, and she screamed in surprise, the iron slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor with a metallic noise. I took advantage of the confusion and rushed forward, holding her arms and pushing her against the wall, away from the tied-up women. Let go of me, let go, Henry. You don't know what you are doing. You are interfering with the divine plan. She was screaming and struggling with surprising strength for a woman her age. Her nails scratched my face. Her knee hit my thigh. But I held firm, using all my weight to keep her immobilized. With one hand, I managed to pull out my cell phone and dial 911. Hello, hello. I need the police urgently at 247 Hortensia Street. There are tied-up women. There is a torture situation. Please, hurry. I could barely relay the information while struggling to keep Eleanor controlled. She was biting, scratching, spitting, completely consumed by a seemingly superhuman rage. After what felt like an eternity, but must have been only a few minutes, I heard the sirens approaching. Eleanor heard them too, and stopped struggling, her body going limp in my hands. When I looked at her face, I saw tears streaming. But they weren't tears of remorse or fear. They were tears of rage, of frustration at having been interrupted. You destroyed everything, Henry. You destroyed the most important work of my life. God will never forgive you for this, and neither will I. Those were the last words my wife spoke to me before the police entered. The officers rushed into the laundry room with their weapons drawn, yelling for me to let go of Eleanor and step away. For a second, in all the confusion, they must have thought I was the criminal. But when they saw the 5 tied-up women, the burns, the iron still steaming on the floor, the notebook with the list of names, their expressions changed completely. It was a mixture of shock, disgust, and disbelief. One of the officers, a young man who looked like he was on his first serious call, ran out of the laundry room and vomited in the yard. I released Eleanor and stepped away, my legs shaking so badly I nearly collapsed. 2 officers ran to help the women, removing the rags from their faces, cutting the ropes, and calling for an ambulance on the radio. Their screams of relief and despair filled the air. Laura, who was the most conscious, pointed at Eleanor and sobbed, "She's the devil in the form of a woman. She burned me, she tortured me, she said she was saving my soul." Denise, who had fainted, was being revived by an officer administering first aid. Meanwhile, Eleanor was eerily calm. When the police asked her to put her hands behind her back to be handcuffed, she obeyed without resistance, with that same serene smile on her face. You don't understand what you're doing. You are arresting a servant of God. But it doesn't matter. The Lord will free me at the right time. He always takes care of his chosen ones." Her voice was soft, almost maternal, as if she were chatting about the weather or a cookie recipe. One of the officers, an older man with gray hair and a scar on his face, grabbed the notebook from the table and began to flip through it. I saw his face grow increasingly pale as he read. My God in heaven, this is a torture diary. It has detailed descriptions of everything she did to each victim. It has dates, times, methods used, and it has photos. He turned the notebook to show the other officer, and I briefly glimpsed some Polaroids glued to the pages. They were images I will carry forever in my memory, even though I saw them for only a second. Women with horrific burns, faces contorted by pain, bodies scarred. "How many victims are documented here?" asked the younger officer, who had come back inside, still looking green. The older one quickly counted. 12 victims before these 5 today. 12 women My God. Some are marked as purification complete. What does that mean? He looked at Eleanor with a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. Eleanor smiled even wider, if that was possible. It means they completed the process, that the purification was total, that their souls were cleansed by the sacred fire, and they could depart for the final judgment without the marks of earthly sins. She spoke this in the same tone she would use to explain how to bake bread. The older officer closed his eyes for a moment, as if asking for strength, and then yelled at the other one, "Call forensics! Call the detective! Call everyone you can! This is the biggest crime scene I've seen in 30 years of police work." As more police and paramedics arrived, filling our house, our life, with sirens and flashing lights, I stood there in the corner of the laundry room, trying to process everything. How had I not noticed? I tried to recall the past few years, searching my memory for signs I should have seen. And I began to remember strange things that hadn't seemed important at the time. That time I came back from a trip, and Eleanor was scrubbing the laundry room floor in the middle of the night, saying she had spilled paint and needed to clean it before it stained. That other time I found a pile of burnt clothes in the trash, and she said there had been a small accident with the iron, the time she stayed up for days without proper sleep, with deep dark circles, and said she had insomnia from praying. An investigator approached me with a notepad. "Sir, you are the husband. I need you to come with me to give your statement. I need to know everything you know about her activities." I could barely nod. I felt incapable of speaking. My throat was tight, the tears I had held back for so long finally beginning to fall. They were not tears of sadness for Eleanor, but of relief for having saved those 5 women, and of devastating guilt for not having saved the 12 before them. They took Eleanor, handcuffed, to the patrol car, and as she passed me, she paused and looked into my eyes. "You will regret this, Henry. You will see that I was right. When the sinners continue to spread evil throughout the world, and no one does anything to stop them, you will remember me, and you will understand that I was the only one with the courage to do what needed to be done." After that, she got into the police car without resistance, and that was the last time I saw her outside of a correctional facility setting. The house became a frenzy. Forensics teams began searching every corner, every closet, every drawer, and they started finding things. Many more things than I could have imagined. At the back of the laundry room closet, there was a box with instruments she had adapted for torture. Irons of different sizes, tongs, even a small blowtorch I thought I had lost years ago. There were also vials of sedative medications she must have used to drug the victims before bringing them home. How did she get those medications? They later discovered she had forged prescriptions using names of local doctors. They also found, and this completely destroyed me, an old freezer I didn't even know existed, hidden under a tarp in the backyard. When they opened it, there were human remains inside. Body parts she had... My God, I can't even say this properly. She had kept pieces of the victims as trophies. The stench when they opened that freezer made even the most experienced officers step back. I threw up again right there in the yard, until my stomach had nothing left to expel. The next few hours were a blur. They took me to the precinct, and they asked me thousands of questions. I was also under suspicion, of course. How could a husband not know his wife was a serial killer? But the investigation soon showed that I really knew nothing. My alibi for the dates of the crimes was solid. I was always on the road. I had travel records, delivery invoices, everything documented, and the surviving victims themselves confirmed that I was not involved, that Eleanor always acted alone, always when I was traveling. The detective in charge of the case, a serious man in his late 50s, spoke to me privately after hours of interrogation. "Mr. Wallace, I know this must be the worst experience of your life, but I need you to be strong now. We are going to need your help to understand her mind, to find out if there are more victims we don't know about. From what we've gathered so far, your wife meticulously planned every kidnapping. She studied the women for months, learned their routines, and waited for the right moment to act. It is likely that there are more victims besides those documented in the notebook." More victims. The word echoed in my head like a death knell. How did she manage to bring those women home without anyone seeing? How did no one suspect anything? My voice came out hoarse, destroyed from so much crying and yelling. How did she do it? The detective sighed heavily. She was extremely careful. She chose women who lived alone or who had few social ties. She used potent sedatives to render them unconscious before bringing them in a covered shopping cart, as if she were carrying heavy groceries. Neighbors saw her doing that several times, but no one found it strange. It was just Mrs. Eleanor, the trucker's wife, returning from the Kroger. Mrs. Eleanor, the trucker's wife. That's how the whole neighborhood knew her. The religious, charitable woman who always helped out at church, who took food to the homeless, who visited the sick. No one would ever suspect her, and that was exactly what made it all the more terrifying. Evil had the most common, most innocent, most unsuspecting face possible. There is one more thing I need to tell you, Henry. The detective hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. We found evidence that she was planning... Well, she was planning to include you on her list. There are notes in the notebook about the negligent husband and how your absence was a sin that would need to be purified, eventually. I think you were saved by a hair's breadth. If you hadn't returned today, if you hadn't interrupted her, it is highly likely that at some future point, you too would have become a victim. The floor vanished beneath my feet. Eleanor was planning to kill me. The woman I had shared a bed with for 35 years, the mother of my son, was planning to torture and murder me. I was no longer even her husband. I was just another name on a list of sinners who needed to be punished. And the worst thing is that part of me understood her twisted logic. I had been absent. I had been negligent. I had failed as a partner. But that justified nothing. Absolutely nothing of what she had done. When they finally released me, it was already dawn. I returned home, or what was left of it. The police had cordoned off the entire property as a crime scene. I couldn't go in. I couldn't take anything. I stood there on the sidewalk, looking at the house where I had lived for so many years, where I had had happy moments, where I had raised my son. And now, that house was known as the House of Horrors, the laundry room slaughterhouse, the purifier's house. Journalists were already arriving. Reporters were already surrounding the place. I had to be escorted by the police to leave there, without being assaulted by cameras and microphones. I spent that night, and many others after that, in a cheap motel on the other side of town. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eleanor's face smiling as she held the hot iron. I heard the muffled screams of the women. I smelled the burnt flesh. I had nightmares where I was tied to one of those chairs, and Eleanor was coming toward me with the red-hot iron, saying my hour of purification had finally arrived. The following days were hell in a completely different way than what I had experienced that Friday. The story spread like wildfire throughout the city, and soon it was on national news. Serial killer of Dallas, the purifier, the angel of death of the laundry room. These were some of the nicknames the press gave Eleanor. My face also appeared in every newspaper, as the husband who knew nothing, the blind man who lived with a monster without realizing it. There were people who believed in my innocence, but there were many people who also blamed me. I received death threats, late-night calls from people insulting me, saying I was an accomplice, that I should be imprisoned alongside her. I had to change my phone number 3 times. Social media, which I barely used, was full of theories about me. They said I knew everything, that I helped her choose the victims, that my story about discovering it by chance was all a lie. Some people even started petitions demanding my arrest. Life as I knew it had completely ended. The worst part of it all was having to tell Ethan. My son lived in New York City. He had built a life far away from here. He was married and had 2 small children. When I called him that Saturday morning, a day after the discovery, my voice barely came out. Ethan, I need to tell you something. It's about your mother. She did terrible things, son. Things I never imagined a human being was capable of. I told him everything. I heard the deathly silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard my adult son cry like a child. He came to Dallas immediately, left his family in New York City, and took the first flight. When we met at the hotel where I was staying, we just hugged and cried for hours. How did we not see anything, Dad? How did we live with her and not realize she was capable of this? Ethan blamed himself too, and I had no answer to give. I had no explanation that made sense. Eleanor had been a present, even affectionate mother. She had never shown violence toward him. How did she separate her 2 sides so well? Together, Ethan and I went to visit the surviving victims at the hospital. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Laura, the neighbor Eleanor called a gossip, was hospitalized with 3rd-degree burns in several places on her body. When she saw me enter the room, she started screaming in terror, believing I had come to finish Eleanor's work. It took 2 nurses to calm her down, to explain that I just wanted to apologize, that I had nothing to do with what my wife had done. Apologies won't erase these marks, Mr. Wallace. Her voice came out weak, full of pain. I will carry these scars forever. Every time I look in the mirror, I will remember the face of that woman smiling as she brought the iron close to my skin. And you know what the worst part is? She prayed while she did it. She recited the Our Father, the Hail Mary, as if she were in church. She said that every burn was a blessing, that I should be grateful for the purification. Laura's eyes were empty, lifeless, even though she was alive. Denise, the woman from the Kroger, had suffered a nervous breakdown and was in the psychiatric wing. I couldn't even talk to her. The doctors said she had entered a catatonic state. She didn't speak, didn't react to anything, just stayed curled up in a fetal position on the bed, trembling. Brenda, the teacher, had lost sight in one eye due to a burn that reached her face. Michelle had permanent marks on her arms and chest. Carol, the woman from the church, had suffered so much psychological trauma that she had attempted suicide 2 days after leaving the hospital and was now under constant surveillance. 5 destroyed lives I managed to save. But what about the other 12? The ones who were not lucky enough for me to return from my trip early. The investigation was working to identify all the victims through Eleanor's notebook and the remains found at the house. Some families had filed missing person reports over the past few years, but no one ever imagined they were connected. They were women from different neighborhoods, different ages, with no apparent connection between them, besides having crossed my wife's path. There was one victim in particular who deeply affected me. She was a young woman in her 20s named Ashley, who worked as a cashier at a convenience store. According to Eleanor's notebook, she had been purified complete because she was ill-mannered and disrespectful to customers. Ashley's parents had contacted the police when she disappeared. They made posters, searched the entire city, but never found anything. And all the while she was there, just a few blocks from their house, being tortured in my laundry room while I was driving across America, knowing nothing. I met Ashley's parents when they went to identify their daughter's remains at the medical examiner's office. The father saw me in the hallway. My face had been on TV so much that everyone recognized me, and he ran toward me. I thought he was going to hit me and even closed my eyes, waiting for the blows I felt I deserved. But he hugged me tightly, and cried on my shoulder. At least now we know what happened to her. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering if she is suffering somewhere. Thank you for saving those other 5. Thank you for stopping more families from going through this. That hug broke me inside. I didn't deserve gratitude. I deserved hatred. I deserved punishment for having been so blind, so absent, so negligent. If I had paid more attention to my wife, if I had noticed the signs of madness growing in her, maybe Ashley and the other victims would be alive. I carried that guilt like a stone in my chest, a stone that grew heavier every day. Eleanor was formally charged with 12 murders and 5 attempted murders. The prosecutor said it was the most shocking case in Texas history, maybe all of America. A common homemaker with no history of violence, who had suddenly transformed into a serial killer, driven by religious fanaticism. Psychologists and psychiatrists were called in to evaluate her, to try to understand what had happened in her mind. The psychiatric evaluation, when it finally came out, was terrifying. They said Eleanor suffered from a psychotic disorder with mystical religious delusions, that she truly believed God spoke to her, that she had been chosen for a divine mission. It was not pretense. It was not manipulation. She genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. The psychiatrist in charge explained that this type of delusion can develop gradually, especially in people with a predisposition who go through periods of social isolation. Social isolation. The words hit me like a slap. Eleanor had been alone at home for years while I traveled. She had immersed herself deeper and deeper into religion, attending more and more church activities, reading the Bible obsessively. And I had allowed it, even encouraged it, believing it was good for her to have an occupation, something to fill the time while I was away. I never imagined that this faith was turning into something sick, that her thoughts were becoming so distorted as to create this figure of the purifier who believed she had the divine right to punish sinners. The trial was scheduled for a few months later. I was going to have to testify. I was going to have to sit in a courtroom and talk about my life with that woman, about how I didn't notice anything, about the day I discovered the horror. The defense was going to plead insanity. They obviously wanted her to be declared not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a psychiatric hospital instead of going to prison. The prosecutor, on the other hand, wanted life in prison, the maximum the law allowed. While all this was unfolding, I had to deal with practical life. The house had been released by forensics, but it was completely destroyed. The investigators had ripped out sections of walls looking for evidence. They had pulled up the laundry room floor. They had messed everything up. And even if they hadn't destroyed anything, I could never live there again. Every corner of that house had become a reminder of the horror. I put it up for sale. But who would want to buy the house of horrors? Even though I drastically lowered the price, no one was interested. Ethan suggested I move to New York City to be close to him and the family. "Dad, you will never have peace here in Dallas. Everyone knows your face. Everyone will be judging you. There in New York City, we can start over. No one has to know the story." It was tempting, very tempting. But something in me resisted the idea of running away. Running away was what I had always done, wasn't it? Running away to the highway, running away from problems, running away from reality. But maybe this time running away was truly the only option. How was I going to rebuild my life in a city where everyone knew me as the serial killer's husband? How was I going to get a job, make friends, have any kind of normal life? Every time I went out on the street, I felt the stares, the whispers, the fingers pointing. Look, there goes the purifier's husband. How did he not know anything? He must be an accomplice too. No matter how many times the police confirmed my innocence, there would always be people doubting. It was on one of those days, walking aimlessly through the city, trying to clear my head, that something happened that made me make a decision. I stopped at a small coffee shop to grab a coffee and overheard two men at the next table talking. They say her husband is still around here. What nerve, right? I would have disappeared or been too ashamed to have lived with that psycho. The other replied, they say he knew everything, that the police were incompetent and couldn't prove it. People like that should be in jail too. I got up, paid for the coffee I hadn't even touched, and left there with one certainty. I had to disappear. I had to go somewhere where no one knew me, where I could try to rebuild some semblance of life away from the shadow of what Eleanor had done. I called Ethan that same night and accepted his offer. I would move to New York City as soon as the trial was over. I would change my last name, if possible. I would try to become someone else, someone who didn't carry that terrible weight of being known as the purifier's husband. But before I left, I had one last thing to do. I needed to look into Eleanor's eyes one more time and ask why. The visit to the prison was the hardest thing I have ever done. I needed special authorization because we were still legally married, and she was in a maximum security section awaiting trial. They searched me completely. I went through metal detectors. I signed documents saying I understood the risks. When they took me to the visitation room, with that thick glass in the middle and phones on either side, my hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the receiver. When Eleanor entered, escorted by two guards, I was shocked. Her hair was completely white, totally white, when before she only had some gray strands. She had lost a lot of weight. The orange prison uniform was loose on her. But what frightened me most were her eyes. They had that same fanatic gleam, that same disturbing serenity. The prison had changed nothing in her mind. She sat down on the other side of the glass, picked up the phone, and smiled at me. She smiled as if we were on a romantic date, not a prison visit. "Hello, Henry. I knew you would come. God told me you needed answers before you could move on." Her voice was calm, sweet as it had always been. Why, Eleanor? Just explain to me why you did all this. My voice came out broken, full of pain. She tilted her head thoughtfully, as if choosing her words carefully. Because someone had to. The world is full of sin, Henry, full of evil disguised as normalcy. Those women I purified were not innocent victims. They were agents of evil, spreading suffering wherever they went. Laura destroyed families with her gossip. Denise humiliated poor people, humble folk who already suffered so much. The teacher traumatized children, including our son. Michelle tried to destroy our marriage. Carol is a hypocrite who uses faith to judge and condemn others. They all deserved the purification I was performing. And you know what? When I put the hot iron on their skin and they scream, I feel that God is smiling, giving me strength to continue. But you killed people, Eleanor. You tortured, you mutilated, you destroyed entire families with your sick fanaticism. I was screaming now, tears running down my face. The guard made a move to interrupt the visit, but I raised my hand, asking for one more minute. It wasn't fanaticism. It was true faith. And you know what, Henry? I don't regret anything. I would do it all again if I could. Every burn, every scream, every purification was necessary. And even here in prison, the work continues. There are women in here who need to be purified too. Guards, inmates, all full of sin. Her smile widened, and I felt my stomach churn. It was at that moment that I understood that the Eleanor I had known had never really existed. Or maybe she had existed a long time ago, but had been slowly devoured by this madness, replaced by this creature who believed she was a divine instrument. There was nothing left of the woman I had married, with whom I had had a son, with whom I had shared a life. I came here hoping to find some remorse, some sign that you realize the evil you did. But you are beyond saving, Eleanor. You are lost in a madness you call faith. I got up from the chair, ready to leave and never return. Henry, wait. For the first time, her voice faltered slightly. I just want you to know that I loved you. In my own way, within my mission, I loved you, and you were lucky. If you had stayed longer, if you had continued to neglect me, eventually your name would also be on the list. But God was merciful and sent you away on the right day. Those words froze me. They confirmed what the detective had said. I was on her list. My own wife was planning to torture and kill me. Goodbye, Eleanor. I hope I never see you again in my life. I hung up the phone and walked out of that room without looking back, hearing her shout something about forgiveness and purification through the glass. The trial took place 3 months later. It was a media circus, cameras everywhere, people lining up to get a spot in the gallery. I had to testify, tell everything I had seen that day, answer invasive questions about my married life. The defense tried to paint me as the absent husband who had pushed Eleanor to madness. The prosecutor used me as an example of an unaware victim. Who could have been next? When they showed the photos of the victims in court, several people felt sick and left. I forced my eyes to stay open, to see every image, every burn, every torture mark. It was my penance for not having seen it earlier, for not having saved those women when there was still time. Eleanor was declared legally insane, but too dangerous for society. She was sentenced to life imprisonment in a maximum security forensic psychiatric hospital. She would never leave there. When they read the sentence, she just smiled and said, "God knows the truth. He will free me when the time is right." I left that courtroom feeling that a part of me had died in there. After the trial, I kept my promise and moved to New York City. Ethan helped me find a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the center, where no one knew me. I sold the Dallas house for a ridiculous price to an investor who wanted to demolish it and build something else on the land. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to get rid of that place, to erase that address from my life. The first few months in New York City were the hardest. I couldn't sleep properly. I woke up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, with nightmares where I was tied to that chair, and Eleanor was coming with a hot iron. I dreamed of the women's screams, the smell of burnt flesh, and her serene smile as she tortured the victims. There were nights when I simply didn't sleep. I would sit in the living room with all the lights on until dawn. Ethan insisted that I seek professional help. "Dad, you have post-traumatic stress. You need to talk to someone. You need to treat this before it gets worse." I hesitated at first, because men of my generation didn't have that habit of going to a therapist, of talking about feelings. But I eventually gave in because I knew I wasn't well, that I couldn't go on alone. The therapist I started seeing was Dr. Regina. She was a woman in her 50s, with a calm and welcoming manner. In the first few sessions, I could barely speak. I would just sit there on her couch, staring at the floor, the words stuck in my throat. But little by little, I opened up. I told her everything. Not just about the day of the discovery, but about the years of marriage, about how absent I had been, about the guilt that consumed me. "Henry, you need to understand one thing." Dr. Regina's voice was firm but gentle. "You are not responsible for the decisions Eleanor made. You may have been an absent husband. You may have failed to notice the signs. But the one who tortured and killed those women was her, not you. The guilt is hers, not yours." I wanted to believe those words. I really did. But it was hard. How could I not feel guilty when I had such clear evidence that I had failed? Dr. Regina explained to me about Eleanor's disorder, about how that type of psychosis can develop so subtly that even trained professionals would have difficulty detecting it at first. She hid it very well. She was functional. She took care of the house. She maintained appearances. This type of person manages to completely separate the normal life from the criminal life. You had no way of knowing, especially being absent for so long. Therapy sessions became my safe haven. It was the only place where I could speak openly about everything, where I wasn't judged, where I could cry without shame. And I cried a lot in that office. I cried for the victims. I cried for Ashley and her family. I cried for the 5 women who survived but were scarred forever. I cried for my son, who had to discover that his mother was a monster. I cried for myself, for the man I had been and who died that Friday in the laundry room. Slowly, very slowly, I found a routine in New York City. I didn't go back to work as a trucker. I couldn't drive long distances without having panic attacks. I got a simple job in a warehouse, doing inventory, organizing merchandise. It was manual, repetitive work that didn't require much thought. And that was exactly what I needed at the time. I avoided making friends. I was afraid someone would discover who I was, what my history was. I used a different last name at work, a shortened version of my real name. When colleagues asked about my life, I made up vague stories. I said I was widowed, that I had come from another city looking to start over. It wasn't a complete lie. I was widowed in a strange way. Widowed from a woman who was still alive, but was dead to me. Ethan tried to include me in his family's life. He invited me to Sunday dinners, to the grandchildren's birthdays, to walks in the park. I went because I didn't want to disappoint him more than I already had throughout my life. But it was difficult. Seeing him with his wife, seeing the happy, normal family. reminded me of what I had lost, the farce that my marriage had been. My little grandchildren were too young to understand. Thankfully, Ethan and his wife had decided never to tell them about their grandmother, about what had happened. They were going to wait until they were older, if they ever told them at all. There was a particularly difficult moment at the older grandson's birthday. He was still small, and with the innocence of children, he asked, "Grandpa, where is Grandma? Why doesn't she ever come to the parties?" The whole table fell silent. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but I spoke first. "Grandma is very far away from here, sweetie, but she sends you a kiss." It wasn't a lie. She was far away, locked in a forensic asylum, and in a twisted way, she probably would have sent a kiss to her grandson if she could, because that maternal part had been real, even with all the madness. I started attending a support group for relatives of criminals. It was something Dr. Regina had suggested, and I had resisted at first. But when I finally went, I found other people who understood what I was going through. There was the mother of a murderer, the wife of a rapist, the brother of a thief who had killed someone during a robbery. Everyone carried their own cross of guilt and shame. It was there that I met Mrs. Teresa, a woman who had discovered that her husband was abusing his own granddaughter. She became something like a friend, the first person outside of therapy with whom I managed to talk openly about Eleanor. We carry the guilt for what they did, even though we know it is not our responsibility. But what we can do is try to live the best way possible, to honor the victims by living a decent life. I tried to do that. I tried to live a decent life, even when it was difficult, even when I felt like giving up on everything. There were days when I looked at the medication the psychiatrist had prescribed for anxiety and thought how easy it would be to take the whole box, go to sleep, and never wake up again. But then I would think about Ethan, about my grandchildren, about the 5 women I had saved who were alive because I returned from my trip that day. I owed it to them to keep living, to keep trying. I never heard directly from Eleanor again. I knew through others that she remained in the forensic asylum, that she still had those religious delusions, that the doctors said she was an incurable case. Sometimes articles about her would appear in the press, especially around significant dates or when there was a similar crime elsewhere. "Remember the case of the purifier of Dallas," the headlines would say. And there was her photo, and sometimes mine too. I learned to avoid crime news. I uninstalled social media. I stopped watching the news on TV. I only read the sports pages of the printed newspaper. It was the only way to maintain some peace of mind, not to be constantly reminded of what had happened. But even so, every now and then, someone would recognize my face on the street, or a coworker would discover who I was through an internet search. And then I would have to change jobs again, start over once more. The years passed like that, in a routine of survival rather than life. I worked, I went to therapy, I visited Ethan and the family, I went to the support group. I didn't have great joys, but I also didn't have the constant despair of the first few months. I had learned to live with the weight of the story, even if it never stopped pressing on my chest. Today, so many years later, I still carry the scars of that day. They are not visible marks on the skin like those of the surviving victims, but they are scars on the soul that will never fully heal. I learned to live with them. I learned that life continues even after the unthinkable happens. Even when you discover that you lived for decades next to a monster without realizing it. I still go to therapy. I probably will for the rest of my life. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still avoid going near laundry rooms. I still feel a tightness in my chest when I hear the sound of an iron, but I also learn to have small moments of peace. I learn to appreciate the smile of my grandchildren, the hug of my son, the quiet morning coffee on a regular Sunday. Eleanor remains confined in the forensic asylum. I learned that she now has dementia, that she barely recognizes people, that she spends her days praying in a corner. Part of me feels pity for the woman she was before the madness took hold, but most of me just feels relief that she will never be able to hurt anyone again. The 5 women I managed to save that day went on with their lives, each carrying their own scars. I heard that some underwent intensive therapy, others moved away. One of them wrote about the experience. I never spoke to any of them personally again. I believe my presence would only bring back painful memories, but I think of them always. I thank God for returning from my trip that day, for arriving in time to save them. What did I learn from all this? I learned that evil can wear any mask, even that of a religious homemaker. I learned that sometimes the person sleeping next to you is a complete stranger. I learned that emotional negligence can have consequences we never imagine. And I learned most of all, that life can change completely in a single second. When you open a door and find hell on the other side. If this story of discovering something terrible about someone you loved touched your heart in any way, please leave a like to bring comfort to this old man. Subscribe to the Grandpa's Diaries channel to hear more true stories that I will tell you with complete sincerity. And tell me in the comments where you are watching this video from and what time it is there. Have you ever discovered a shocking secret about someone close to you? How did you handle it? This grandpa is happy to know who is listening on the other side, and at what time of day you took a moment for this story. A big hug, the size of my broken but still beating heart. The enduring lesson of this nightmare is the harrowing realization that the greatest danger often hides behind the most familiar, unassuming masks. We are taught to look for monstrous behavior in shadows and strangers. But this experience taught me that true evil can grow in the quiet comfort of a 35-year marriage, fueled by a corrosive blend of isolation and fanatical belief. My failure was not in complicity, but in the passive neglect that allowed a sick mind to fester unchecked. We become so accustomed to routine, so comfortable in our assumptions of normalcy, that we fail to recognize the small, critical signs of disintegration in those we love most. For the survivors and for myself, the deepest scar is the knowledge that the world's quiet places, the homes, the churches, the everyday relationships, require constant vigilance and emotional presence. Healing is not about forgetting the horror, but acknowledging the personal responsibility to speak up and act when intuition screams louder than convenience. The purest form of moving forward is to use your second chance, not for silence, but to ensure your presence is a force for good, preventing the monstrous solitude that breeds such unforgivable actions.